Not really. Sorry.
Well, it wouldn't be a Wednesday afternoon if it wasn't for technical issues. Our sincere apologies. We are now live. Over to you, Carla.
Thank you so much, Eva. And yeah, that's what happens sometimes. Thank you all for joining us today as we explore a day in the life of language and dialects. The Polaron team would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians throughout Australia and their continued connection to land, sea, and the community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So I would like to start with the agenda. We will firstly introduce our panelists and hear from Polaron's founder before moving to our presentation, the panel discussion, and finally finishing with the Q&A. Just a reminder to everyone, we will be answering your questions and comments during the Q&A section at the end of this webinar. So I would like to introduce our Polaron's panelists today. First off, we have our Polaron's Managing Director and linguistic expert, Dominic Carter. Dominic has a master's in French and Theory of Language and Literature from University College London. He also speaks several languages, including French, Spanish, German, and Italian. Thank you so much for joining us, Dominic. We're also joined by our project coordinator, Byung-hyun An. Byung-hyun's expertise is pivotal in steering the project management and coordination of language services production activities. Byung-hyun plays a critical part in the logistics of translation and localization projects, ensuring they are executed efficiently from inception to delivery. It is great to have you back, Byung-hyun, again here in this webinar. Finally, I would also like to give a warm welcome to Eva Hussein, the founder and director of Polaron Language Services. Eva is a certified translator, interpreter, and a NADI examiner. She will be our moderator for our panel today. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much. And by far, language is one of my favorite topics, and I am speaking to some of my favorite people that can tell us more about language than I will ever know. So thank you, Carla, for introducing Byung-hyun and Dominic. Just very briefly about Polaron, we have been around for the last 24 years. It's our anniversary in November. And what do? We provide language services. So that includes translations, interpreting, community engagement. And we do work with around 1,500 NATI certified interpreters, translators, but also multilingual specialists. And you've already covered that, Carla, but Byung-hyun's role is to manage translation projects. So that is why we're so interested in hearing from him about this. On how to resolve translation issues. And we also have with us our managing director, whose secret life includes the love of languages, understanding of languages. He studied linguistics and in particular French literature, or he'll be able to tell us more about it. But I will now hand over to Byung-hyun for a very short presentation about languages and dialects. There's a lot of confusion about what they are and how they work, so we're hoping to educate and inform during today's session. Over to you, Byung-hyun.
Thanks, Eva. This is Byung-hyun. Today I'm going to talk about language and dialects. Next slide, please. Yes, so what is a language? Language is a system of communication that takes various means, such as speech, writing, or gesture. There are more than 7,000 languages in the world, while there are only 195 countries. This means there are approximately 35 languages for every country on average. Chinese is the most spoken language with 1.3 billion native speakers, followed by Spanish with 486 million people. However, I would say English is the most popular language in the world with 380 million people over 67 countries, largely spread around the globe. There are about 300 languages being spoken in Australia, including Aboriginal languages. As you can see, there are many languages in the world, and it's interesting that many countries do not speak just one language. Next slide, please. Since language is alive and continuously changing over time by the people who speaks it, it can branch off to form a new language. These divergences are categorized based on how the language has changed or what has changed in the language, which are the terms listed here. Dialects, pidgin, accent, and all others depict particular kind of differences that the language has developed. For example, we say that a language has a dialect when the language starts to be used in a peculiar way within a social group or region, different to its original. Pidgin is created when two or more groups of people without a common language tries to communicate to each other. It often takes some elements from local languages and has grammatically simplified form. Example of pidgins are Nigerian pidgin, Tok pidgin. Creole is a little different to pidgin as it takes a stable form that is developed from mixing two languages, usually with a local language and a foreign language that are widely used within the local community. Example for this will be French Creole. Next slide, please. These languages are known to have significant dialect variations. For example, English has American English, Chinese has Cantonese, Spanish has Latin American Spanish, Hindi with Punjabi, Tamil, and so on. Next slide, please. For example, Spanish spread globally and established itself in various countries such as Mexico, Peru, and Colombia. Due to the geographical separation of these regions, regional dialects began to develop. Next slide, please. So dialects can be formed for various regions. Here are some of the primary factors. Spanish serves as a main example of a dialect shaped by migration and settlement patterns. Indian dialects are deeply rooted in regional identities, with Hindi being the dominant language in the northern area and other dialects in the southern area. Hakka Chinese developed as a result of geographical isolation with minimal contact with the outside world. English or any other language that is continually evolving under the influence of media and technology, leading to a gradual divergence between younger and older generations due to differences in media exposure. My presentation ends here. I hope this helped you to understand more about language and dialects. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Byung-hyun. Thank you so much for the examples. That was really interesting. And from a Spanish speaker aspect, I can really see the differences when you speak Spanish in different countries throughout Latin America, and even in my own country, that is Peru. There is so many differences according to the place that you are. Now we're moving to the panel discussion. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you, Carla. And we don't have to look that far to really understand how languages and dialects work. When you think about English, there are all kinds of variations. We can hear, for example, here in Australia, the differences between Australian English and New Zealand English, but most people cannot. I can't really hear the difference between Canadian and American English, and Canadians get very upset if they're called Americans. Dominic, what are the key drivers behind dialect variations, apart from the fact that They are based on regional development, I guess. And a lot of these languages are languages that colonized areas. Am I right in saying that?
I think we should start with all languages are always changing all the time. That's the first thing, because when we're talking about dialects and languages, often the difference is political, it's social, it's geographical. My test generally for a language is there an army? If they have an army, they're a language. So you'll find, Flemish and Dutch are 99.9% identical. I don't think you could even call one a dialect of the other. There's a handful of words that are different. They are 100% mutually intelligible, but they are spread over two different countries and they have two different names. For much more political, dangerous reasons, you might have similar things in, between Croatian and Bosnian, for example, or something like that, where you've got very real conflict that separated two languages with a lot of sensitivities and whatever's around it, but that languages are essentially the same. So all languages change all the time. That is one thing. I mentioned geographical differences, political differences, even within America, for example, there are differences in, well, accents, obviously, but also silly things like how you call sodas. They call sodas in some areas, they're called pop in others, and they're called tonics or just referred to as Coke or soft drink. And you can sort of map that geographically, because language kind of follows waves, geographical waves, I guess. It just moves along. The key drivers are really time and the users of the language. Typically, the biggest factor in changing languages is generations. Young people speak differently from their parents. You don't really have to go very far to see that. I mean, the words that we used as children, surprised, shocked, amused our parents at times. And the words that we hear from our children now, you go, oh, that's just wrong, it's not right, or whatever. It happens all the time. So usage changes all the time. And if enough change happens, then it becomes a dialect, possibly, if a bunch of people are geographically separated that do it. I can't tell you what the main factor for change is, other than change is permanent.
And how about politics and wars?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely commerce, trading, progress, everything changes language. 10 years ago, Zoom, webinars, emoticons, tablets, all of these things have happened quite recently. But it's not just technology, anything. Yeah, life changes all the time. And I don't think labradoodles existed very long ago, or frappuccinos, and I don't think anybody was telling anybody to chillax or describe anything as awesome sauce. But they do now.
Yeah, and tell me with English. So I'm a native speaker of Polish. You're an truly bilingual speaker of French and English. It is true, I guess you would agree with me, that English is quite an aggressive language, if I can call it that, in that because of technology, because of social media, because of the media cycle, all of that, it tends to permeate different languages. Like when I go to Poland, which is, by the way, next week, like half of what people are speaking is actually English. So I end up speaking this antiquated Polish, and it takes me really a couple of days to get into the new expressions and sort of, I want to be cool again and sound like I haven't left, 40 years ago. Is it the case in French as well? Because, the French have the grammar police, do they not?
They have the grammar police. The French also a few decades ago, the French tried to eliminate all forms of local languages in France. They banned them in schools and they punished people who were seen or heard speaking local patois, as they call them. There are efforts to conserve language, the sort of prescriptive approach to language, which is to try and conscribe change as much as possible to definable rules that are steady. I think we should mention writing as well. When the difference maybe between a dialect and writing and a language is whether it's written or not. It's a big factor. So I don't know. French, yeah, is a funny language. They try very hard to stop it, but it is increasingly anglicized as well.
Yeah.
And that's just the way of the world. I think it's mostly the internet that's done that.
Yeah.
Because it's completely collapsed
Yeah.
distances.
I'm going to bring Byung-hun in a moment because I want to ask him one particular question. But I've seen you, with all due respect to Belgians and Canadians, I've seen you cringe when they speak, because over time those dialects, or I can't call them dialects, but variations of the language become so significant that they really sound different and are different, right?
Yeah, look, yes, they are absolutely different. French in many ways is quite amusing. My favorite thing about French is if you go to Belgium, they use a different word for 70, 80, and 90.
Oh, yeah. What's
And
that
if you go to
about?
France and if you go to Switzerland, they use some and they use a mixture of both. God knows what they use in Canada. But it's yes, I don't know why. The French like to say so for 70 it's 60-10. For 80 it's 420s. And for 90s, it's 420-10.
So what's 99?
So it's 420-19. So you have to do a bit of sums. But if you go to Belgium, they just say 99. And it's completely understandable by the French if you say 99, because you hear 90 and 99.
Yeah.
You can tell it's there. And it's built like the numbers 10 to 60. But somehow the French diverged from that to make it sound posher. And it sounds very quaint, and you laugh at Belgians for using it when you're in France, like you laugh at your neighbors. You should.
So, and Byung-hun, do you laugh at North Koreans? Because we had a instance not that long ago where we provided some voiceover in Korean, but it turned out that the person who recorded the sound had North Korean accent. So this is really quite new, because North Korea has only been a separate country, a few decades, but it's already made a difference, yeah?
Yes, it has been. We wouldn't laugh at North Korean accent, but it is
We're
quite
polite, right?
Yes, we're being polite. But there is definitely significant difference in vocabulary they use. They tend to use their own expressions, not a loan word. And their accent is quite different. You can tell. What needs to be considered is that most of the Koreans outside North Korea is South Korean. Because North Koreans, they usually do not have they're not allowed to leave the country most of the time. And that's why you may find it weird or awkward to see North Korean accent outside North Korea, medias and such things, voice recording, videos. Yes, that's why those are the things you would have to consider when you do a translation project. Target audience, definitely, because most people here living in Australia will be South Korean instead of North Korean.
Right, so that's a neat segue into the next topic, which is how to handle these differences, because Korean is listed as one language. It's got regional variations, but Canadian French is actually listed as a separate language. Am I right? Or is it a dialect?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
French Creole, and other languages are considered differently. We translate we treat them as a different language, yes.
Right. And sometimes, you kind of need to sit on the fence on that. But like a language that's spoken by millions and millions of people, that's like Arabic, for example. It is spoken in 22 different countries, and necessarily it's got different accents, different vocab. How do you reconcile those differences when you're translating for Australian audiences? Because, I know that, for example, the Arabic that's spoken in Lebanon is really quite different than the one that's spoken in Iraq or Syria. How do we produce materials that are appropriate for Australian audiences that speak Arabic, where these differences aren't necessarily picked up at the outset or understood even by clients?
Well, the first approach will be to assess the demographic distribution. So that we will have to see how many % of these people speaking this particular Arabic, how many % of them are, and we will try to approach with the most general approach possible if it's for the whole Australia, or if it's for particular area. Let's say if
Or a
it's a
community.
translation project for council in a certain region, then we'll have to see the people, how many people speak that language and which one. Yes.
And Dominic, I might get you to speak to English, because sometimes, we often assume that we do English into other languages, but from time to time we work into English. So you really need to be aware who your audience is, right? Because the differences can be quite significant, and it can be even offensive to people that read it.
Yeah, look, you only have to use your Microsoft Word or whatever it is to see how many forms of English there are. Do you spell words the American way with IZE, and that's just spelling. And there's choices of words and so on. But there tends to be, for every language, a sort of accepted lingua franca, if I can, a sort of official, classic, simplified or more direct way. So in English, obviously, you can do something like plain or easy English. And a lot of people in the world speak some sort of Globish.
Yeah.
A sort of shrunk down version of English, where they don't use the bird would have been being eaten by now sort of tenses that nobody understands anymore, and things like that. But with Arabic, I think there is the sort of classic Arabic would be one way
Modern standard, yeah.
to get around there. And you have to focus on the written form is often more fixed than the local forms. So people who speak local Arabic, I don't know how it works with Arabic specifically, but I'd imagine that a newspaper in Lebanon is mutually intelligible to a newspaper in, I don't know, Dhahran or something.
Yeah. And I think also I hear from our Arabic interpreters, translators, and bilingual workers that many people watch Lebanese or Egyptian TV. So they can understand that standard modern Arabic. But when it comes to regional variations or vocabulary that's more nuanced, then you still switch to your native language, which may have, like significant variations. So like if you think of English, we are also used to watching a lot of American shows, and we understand, most of it. Like every now and then there's a weird expression that we're like, oh, what's that? Is it soda? Is it soft drink? What are they saying? But like for the most part, you will understand American English. But if you want to really understand Australian English, that's the interpreter and that's the translator you would need that can craft messages that resonate, because otherwise it just sounds foreign and you can't really quite connect to the topic, I would think. And one of the things that I have called out, online is people or organizations using flags to denote languages. So that's a no-no. because I don't know how many countries actually have Spanish as an official language, but at least 20. So you can't put Spain as the marker denoting the language, because that's actually quite offensive to a lot of people, I would say. Or put American flag and expect Australian English speakers to engage with that. Just going back to you, Byung-Hun, for a moment there. So what you said, what I heard is that it's really about understanding who you want to talk to, about what and how. Because as Dominic mentioned, it's also intergenerational. And if you're going to be talking to young people, you'd be using different language yet again. Then, for example, communities that have lived in Australia for 30, 40, 50 years who are more familiar with English words. So Carla the other day showed me this really creative way of showing information in Spanglish. Carla, can you briefly tell us what that was about?
Yes, of course. So it was a campaign about, I think, a stroke, and it was in the US. And because of migration, US have a lot of Spanish speakers, especially in the southern states, so like Miami. And if you go to Miami, if you ever had the opportunity, if you go there, everything's in Spanish. Like, you don't need to know English.
Even your Uber drivers send you messages in Spanish.
Drivers, I remember
expect you to speak
Ross, every in the supermarket, they would like do the English and then the Spanish as well, or everybody would understand at least. So because of that, because there's a lot of Spanish speaking community, and also a lot of this community don't speak English necessarily, so, or they speak English in a basic level. There's this campaign that it was produced by an organization, a foundation in the US, about the stroke and the symptoms of the stroke. So they did a combination of the message in English and in Spanish. So the main video showed a girl or a person having a stroke, and they were talking about what are the symptoms. When they were talking about them, it was in English, but the symptoms, they put them in Spanish. And it was so easy to understand for a perspective of a person that doesn't have English as their main language, but that knows how to see the symptoms of a stroke. So it was very, I haven't seen it in other examples, but this one really would work for that community that it's in the US, that has Spanish as their main language and some knowledge in English. And it was resources made in videos as well, because that was very, very engaging. And yeah, I opted to share with you, Eva, because it was something very interesting to see.
I was actually very, very excited to see that, because it was a really creative way of producing resources that were really fit for purpose for the community. And Dominic, you might be able to tell us what's that called, because I cannot remember. But what happens when a language becomes a migrant language? So my sister-in-law, honestly, like 75% of what she says is in English, but she converts those words and puts Polish endings on it. So instead of laundry, it'll be Londra, and it really, it's really quite annoying, but it's just what migrants do. What's that called? What happens there?
I don't know. I'm tempted to say creolization or something like that.
Oh, okay, big word.
It's like applying grammar to a blend of two languages, or to a I'm not sure what the term is. I should know that from
We'll work it out.
It's but it's every speaker is creative, so it's no wonder that language changes all the time. Even your sister-in-law is creative.
Her own language.
And there are so many creative uses for language. I loved Carla's example as well, which I wasn't.
And also, like, that is used a lot in the US. And my grandma, she it's also an American citizen, and she does that. So she kind of mixes she says the word in English, but the how she said it sounds Spanish,
Yeah.
but the word's English. So it's a mix of things. Like I think that also it comes from part of like these migrants might have come to the country when they were already adults. So, one thing is going to a country when you are a baby or a kid or you were born there. So you can, you are immersed in that world and you learn the language so much faster. But a person that is an adult, it's a bit difficult. And these are the things that we do to understand each other and communicate in a way that both parties can.
I'm gonna share with
yeah.
you like Ava's sister-in-law. I grew up with 3 sisters, and we all speak French to each other, even though both our parents always spoke English to us. So it's a very, very strange blend. But occasionally, you end up in situations where we all agree, but we often loan things from English when speaking, and then in French you have to put a gender on words that doesn't exist in English. And we have an ear for what sounds right when you're transforming, when you're grammaticalizing a word. And there you go. And the only example I can think of right now is cauliflower cheese, which is one of our favorite family dishes, which is chou-fleur cheese.
Chou-fleur cheese.
Chou-fleur cheese. Or le cauliflower cheese. Depends on the situation.
Hey, there's a
But
question
look,
about the word that you used just before. Can you tell us what it was? The fancy word that you used to describe this?
grammaticalization.
No, there was another phono something.
Sorry?
It's okay. We'll look it up
No.
later. There was a question from the audience about that. That's all good.
Let me have a look if I can see can someone remind me of the word? I have no memory of what I just said. I'm sorry to say.
That's okay. So that's an opportunity now for me to ask Byung-hun, given that you are a language professional, of course you are a trained professional with a master's in translation, and you also have been practicing for some time. How do you keep up with the changes to the language or influences to the language over time? What are some of the top tips that we could give our audience?
Yes, so I'll give you an example for a NATI translator. So after the translators get NATI certificate, it's not the end there. They would need a constant efforts to keep up with the language. Those efforts include attending webinars, seminars, writing a publication about languages or their profession. Constant practice needs to be proved in order to extend or continue working as a certified translator. Yes, and ongoing education might also count, and they need to keep practicing their language everyday life. Yes, those counts, yes.
Yeah, great points. And I think visit to the country where your language is spoken is quite important as well. So I've mentioned this earlier, but whenever I go to Poland, it really does take me a couple of days to immerse myself in the language and really start thinking in Polish, because my first reaction when I land is, oh my God, everyone speaks here Polish, how quaint. Because I speak English at home and at work, so it's kind of like as I said already, a bit of an aggressive language that I speak Polish sometimes, but like getting yourself immersed in the language is one of the best ways. But I know that people listen to podcasts, read books. Some bigger languages have language associations. So I know that Vietnamese and Arabic, and I know that there's a Polish Interpreters and Translators Association. So any opportunity to practice, but also to keep up with the newest terminology and also to make sure that it's culturally appropriate for the community here. So one of the challenges that I have is that, let's say in mental health or legal spaces, it's not the language that's an issue, but the way we talk about certain things is different. So for example, if I was to translate directly from Polish, I would get to commit suicide. In Australia, we don't say that anymore. We say die by suicide. So having those nuances clearly researched and understood so that we use inclusive language is another challenge, of course. Dominic, do you have our word?
I have, yes, I think I remember the word, but I also wanted to answer this question in my way.
Yes, of
which
course,
is,
go for it.
one, read a newspaper regularly that's official from the country. And two, watch a TV program that young people watch from that country. That should cover the widest range of language development in the shortest amount of time. I think the word was creolization. Was it creolization? What your
Realization, I think so,
your
yeah.
sister-in-law is
Yeah.
doing, which is essentially so a pigeon, as Byung-hun was telling us earlier, is when two people who don't speak the same language come up with a blend of the two languages somehow to communicate. A Creole is a sort of more formal version of that. So in a pidgin, everybody has their own mother tongue and they're just communicating in this artificial language they're making up. A Creole is a sort of artificial language like that, but that's actually your mother tongue. That is your language. And for a language to work well, it needs grammar. It needs a lot more functionality than something you just cobble up together in an exchange of carrots and oranges or whatever the initial need for the thingies. So, for example, in Haiti Creole is essentially French words with African language grammars, and that's a fully functional language where you can display all the aspects of talking that they need to express.
I need you now to tell us the story of orange, of the word orange, because when we were preparing for this webinar, we talked about it. So, and then we move on to the questions from attendees. We are running a little bit over time because of the technical issues. What is it about orange that you want to tell us, Dominic?
What? Oh, I can't remember. Yes. Okay. Vaguely, I remember. Orange is a word that came into the English language via all sorts of long way around, but it came from, I think it's Arabic. Don't quote me on this. I'm terrible at
Sanskrit, I think Hindi. Sanskrit.
But the word was something like naranji, something like that, and it describes this lovely fruit that nobody had before, and they find it fantastic and delicious. The English it finally gets the English, and they call it an orange from naranji. The French call it une orange, which is also orange. And the Spanish call it una naranja. They've kept the N. The English and the French took away the N at the start of the word, which is a process called apocope. And because they're lazy. So the N got attached to the article. So now it's an orange instead of an orange. And in French, it's a bit less lazy. It's just a lazier way of speaking. It's une orange instead of une orange, which is a bit harder to say, a bit more effort. Speakers of language are very lazy.
And I think Paul's made it even worse because they call it pomaranch. Pomarancha, sorry. So they've cobbled a word from French, I think, and made a total mess of it. But luckily, we understand. What's orange in Korean, Byung-hun?
We just call them orange
Just call them orange.
in Korean accent.
Oh,
Orange.
say it. What?
Orange. We say orange.
Orange. Excellent.
You took away the N, so that means you probably took it from a European language.
Yeah, European language. English, most likely.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Here's another fun fact. The word merry for being be happy and be merry initially came from like long ago, from some sort of Ukrainian environment. And that root word, which I can't pronounce now, became via a long circuitous route, bra in French and pretzel in German. So the word merry, bra, and pretzel are all related. So that's just how crazy language change happens, and what from one dialect to another, you can reach completely different results.
Thank you so much. And now over to Carla for some questions. And we've had lots of questions. Over to you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions regarding dialects and how we can be inclusive, because we know at Polaron we want to know more about the goal of the project and who is the final audience. But how can we ensure then, or how can we decide which languages are the ones that, or which dialects within that language are the ones that we need to translate? Is there any ways that we can make this more inclusive? Because also these dialects tend to not be translated a lot in some projects. So usually it's like the top 10, top 5, top 20 languages. And even though we talk about Arabic, but which dialects in Arabic, or which region? So can you give us some recommendations of how to address this challenge?
Thanks, Carla. I might take that on first, because I will have to disappoint everybody in saying that a translation is not a perfect, or interpreting is not a perfect process. So the job of the translator is to bridge this gap and make people linguistically present as much as possible. But it's never 100% accurate. It cannot be, because of nuances, because of all kinds of reasons, that it's not a one-to-one exchange. Yeah. But having said that, I think it's nevertheless very important to understand your audience, and both Byung-hun and Dominic have covered that. And I will also confirm that if you want to speak to people in a particular region that have come to Australia at a particular time from a particular place, then you can consider whether you should use modern standard Arabic or regional variation that would be more useful to a particular group. But typically, because of tight budgets and strict deadlines, people just go for Arabic, go for Spanish, not really understanding these nuances. So to make communities feel like we are speaking the language, it is about educating clients and them wanting to understand what we're telling them. Because guess what? Most people don't want to know. They just want something that looks Chinese and looks Arabic and whatnot. So I think that's always a challenge. And, one of the top tips I would give people is to rely on a good project manager like Byung-hun that can explain those differences to you. And then together you can make a decision whether you go for modern standard Arabic or something else, or whether you go for Latin Spanish or Castilian or Spanish. Dominic, over to you.
I just wanted, sorry, I was nodding, and I just wanted to say, in a strange kind of way, by doing involving community leaders or community consultation process, you can try and reach some sort of, if there is such a thing, a classic Australian Arabic, that is going to reach the largest portion of the population of the Arabic speaking, or Australian Spanish for that reason. And by getting the input of communities in the process of writing and translation, absolutely you can tailor it a little bit, but the starting point still has to be some sort of classic version of the language.
But don't put Spanish flag for Spanish languages.
No.
It's a basic thing, which is a respectful thing to do, but just think about who your audiences are. Don't make assumptions, and ask people that know better. And communities are amazing conduits into the community leaders. Translators, interpreters can explain those things to you. You just have to give us a chance and be interested, I think. And
I also wanted to add that apart from knowing your audience, it's also what is the goal of the project, of the resource, and what's the topic as well. Because if, for example, in the Spanish space where I come from, like from a Latin American country, if you are doing a project that wants to engage international students, you would like to translate into Spanish, but you also have to know which are those students from the Spanish-speaking background, from which countries? Is it Spain, or is it maybe Colombia, Ecuador, Peru? Is it Latin American Spanish that it's the one that would be the most effective for your campaign or for your translations? And also the ones in more need, because we know that, usually in the Latin American countries, we don't have the priorities of or the privilege to in every household to learn English. So we can say that it's a struggle for a lot of international students to maybe they can pass the English exam, but one thing is taking exam and another thing is being in Flinders Street in the middle and not knowing how to, what to do. You're nervous, so the proficiency of English is different. So also it's knowing your audience, what is the need, who is the final user, and what's the topic that you're talking about in your text, in your document, and also thinking about it, and it's linked with dialects. What is the final format of your document? Because some of these languages have it's better to look at formats like audio or videos
Yeah,
to
more engaging.
yes, to engage more.
And also catering for different literacy levels, digital literacy levels, all of that's important. Carla, I am very sorry, but we probably have time for just one more question. And if you have a question for Byung-hun, because we are all talkers, Byung-hun's not, so that would be amazing if we could give him a chance to speak.
Maybe if, because Byung-hun, you mentioned that you are using Orange in Korean. It's like the English but with a Korean accent. What does social media and digital platforms play in the evolution of dialects languages? In this case, do you think, like, for example, Korean's been affected by English because now your generation or a lot of people in Korea are using the English words but with the Korean accent?
Yes, well, definitely there is some influence from the media, even overseas media. What I can see is that in Korea, younger generations tend to use more loan words or English terms as is with the meaning, because people have high they have high level of English education back in Korea, so they kind of do understand each other. But yes, so inclusive loan word is probably the biggest change, or is changing in Korea. Yes.
Brilliant. I think we might be done.
Yes, thank you so much. And there's other more questions, but
Heaps
if
of questions, yeah.
if you ever had like other, want to discuss further more with us, please feel free to contact me at carla.f@polaron.com.au, or Eva is her mail is here as well. And please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn for more Polaron. You can simply scan the QR code to do it, or go to LinkedIn and look us as Polaron Language Services. If you have any feedback for us, please fill the survey. The link is in the comments now. I also want to say a big thank you to Byung-hun, Dominic, and Eva, and all of you for your patience with our tech issue, and of course our amazing marketing team. Thank you once again for joining this webinar, and we hope you enjoyed. See you next time. Bye-bye.